The first shot cracked through the desert morning like a whip across bare skin. I was riding east of Santa Rosa, where the land stretched wide and mean beneath a sun that had not yet decided whether it wanted to warm a man or burn him alive. My horse, Mercy, moved slow beneath me, her hooves kicking up pale dust from a road that looked like it had forgotten where it was going. I had no business in that part of New Mexico territory. That was what I kept telling myself. No business, no purpose, no trouble. Just a man with a tired horse, a bedroll, a canteen half full, and a Colt revolver he wished he could forget how to use. Then came the second shot. Mercy raised her head. Her ears snapped forward. I pulled the reins and listened. The wind moved over the dry grass. A hawk circled somewhere high above. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had been nothing more than some rancher scaring coyotes off his herd. Then I heard a woman scream. That sound did something to me. There are screams a man can ignore if he has killed enough of himself to do it. Drunk men in saloons. Gamblers losing fingers over debts. Outlaws dying badly after choosing the wrong road. I had heard all of them. But this scream had terror in it. Real terror. The kind that comes when a soul understands there is nobody coming. I turned Mercy toward the sound and pressed my heels lightly into her sides. She knew me well enough not to wait for a second command. We rode hard over a shallow rise, dust flying behind us. The road dipped below, bending around a cluster of mesquite and red stone. That was where I saw them. 4 men, 1 wagon, and a woman with hair like fire. Her wagon had been forced sideways across the trail. One of the wheels had sunk into a rut, and a trunk lay busted open nearby, clothes and papers scattered across the dirt. 2 horses were hitched to the front, nervous and foaming, jerking against the reins. The woman stood near the wagon with her back against the sideboard. Her dress was blue, travel-stained at the hem and torn at one sleeve. Even from a distance, I could see the red of her hair spilling loose over her shoulders, bright against the dust and sun. One of the men held a rifle. Another was digging through the trunk. A third sat his horse, laughing. The fourth stood close to the woman. Too close. He was tall, wearing a black hat with a silver band around it. His beard was trimmed sharp, his coat better than a road bandit deserved. He had one hand gripping the woman's wrist, while the other held a revolver low against his thigh. I slowed Mercy, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to count. A man who rushes into gunfire without counting usually ends up being counted himself. 4 men, 2 mounted, 2 on the ground, 1 rifle, 3 revolvers. The tall one was the leader, or at least he believed he was. Men like that always stood closest to the thing they wanted. The woman saw me first. Her eyes lifted over the bandit's shoulder. Even at that distance, I saw hope and fear collide in her face. The tall man noticed. He turned slowly. Well now, he called, his voice carrying across the road. Looks like we got ourselves an audience. I brought Mercy to a stop 20 paces away. My right hand rested on my thigh, not yet near the Colt. That was important. Men will shoot a threat, but pride will make them talk to a calm man, and talking men are easier to kill. Road trouble? I asked. The rider with the laugh spat into the dust. Keep riding, stranger. The man with the rifle shifted his weight. I noticed that. Not nervous. Ready. The tall one smiled. This ain't your concern. The woman swallowed hard. There was dirt on her cheek, but her chin stayed raised. She looked scared, sure, but not broken. That mattered to me more than I expected. Seems to me, I said, when 4 armed men stop one woman on an empty road, concern becomes anybody's business. The tall man's smile thinned. What's your name, stranger? I hated that question. Names are dangerous things in the West. Some open doors, some close coffins. Cole, I said. Just Cole. For a second, nothing changed. Then the rider stopped smiling. The man digging through the trunk froze with a folded paper in his hand. The one with the rifle stared harder at me, as though he was trying to measure my face against a story he had heard in some smoky saloon. The tall man's eyes narrowed. Cole, what? I let the silence sit. That silence had carried me through more gunfights than powder ever did. The woman looked from me to them, confused. Then the rifleman whispered, Cole Maddox. There it was. My full name, dragged out into daylight like a body from a shallow grave. The tall man's jaw tightened, but he did not step back. I gave him credit for that. Many men had. So, he said slowly, the fastest gun in the West rides alone on a morning like this. I ride alone most mornings. I heard you were dead. A lot of men tried to make that true. His fingers flexed around the woman's wrist. That was his mistake. I looked at his hand, then at his gun, then at his eyes. Let her go. He laughed once, though there was no joy in it. You know who she is? No. You know what she's carrying? No. Then you don't know what you're stepping into. I let my hand drift closer to the Colt. I know enough. The man on horseback to my left went first. He thought being mounted gave him advantage. He thought movement would save him. He thought the stories about me were exaggerated. They usually did. His hand dropped toward his holster. My Colt cleared leather. One shot. He fell backward from the saddle before his revolver ever saw sunlight. The rifleman swung toward me. Second shot. His rifle fired into the dirt as he collapsed beside the wagon wheel. The man at the trunk cursed and scrambled for his gun. Third shot. He spun halfway around and hit the ground hard, papers scattering around him like startled birds. The tall man moved last. He was quick, quicker than most. He shoved the woman aside and brought his revolver up toward my chest. But quick is not the same as first. Fourth shot. His hat lifted from his head as the bullet struck him high. He staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, then dropped to his knees in the dust. His revolver slipped from his fingers. The whole thing lasted less than 3 heartbeats. Then the desert went quiet again. Smoke curled from the end of my Colt. Mercy stood still beneath me. The woman pressed one hand against the wagon, breathing hard, staring at the 4 bodies around her as if her mind had not yet caught up to what her eyes had seen. I holstered my gun. That was when my hands began to ache. They always did after. Not from fear. Not from recoil. From memory. I swung down from Mercy and walked toward the woman slowly, keeping my hands visible. A scared woman does not always know the difference between the man who hurt her and the man who stopped him. You injured? I asked. She blinked at me. Then she looked down at her wrist, where the tall man had left red marks. No, she said, though her voice trembled. Not badly. Her accent surprised me. Not Southern. Not Eastern exactly. Educated, but not soft. The kind of voice that had spent time in fine rooms and hard places both. What's your name? She hesitated. That told me plenty. A man saves my life, she said, and still I'm not sure if giving him my name is wise. I almost smiled. Almost. Wise people live longer. She studied me then. Really studied me. My weather-beaten coat. My dusty boots. The scar along my jaw. The Colt at my hip. You really are Cole Maddox? I've been trying not to be. That doesn't sound like a yes. It's the only answer I've got. She nodded slowly. My name is Evelyn Hart. Hart. I knew the name. Not well, but enough. Railroad money. Cattle contracts. Land disputes. Men in dark suits arguing over maps while poorer men bled on the ground those maps described. The Hart family had roots running through half the territory. I glanced at the busted trunk. You're a long way from comfort, Miss Hart. Her face changed at that. A flicker of pain moved behind her green eyes. I was never as comfortable as people believed. Before I could ask what that meant, one of the dying men coughed. The tall leader. He was still on his knees, one hand pressed to the blood at his chest. I had missed the Hart by an inch. Not mercy. Motion. He looked past me at Evelyn. You can't run from him, he rasped. Evelyn went pale. I turned toward him. From who? The man smiled with bloody teeth. Then, he said a name I had not heard in 7 years. Silas Boone. The desert seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stared at him. Silas Boone was not just an outlaw. He was a wound the West had never managed to close. A killer. A planner. A man who built gangs the way railroad men built tracks, stretching violence from town to town until good people learned to lower their voices when his name was spoken. And I had once put a bullet through his brother. The tall man saw recognition on my face and laughed weakly. He knows you're alive, Maddox. Then his eyes rolled back. He fell forward into the dust and did not move again. For a while I said nothing. Evelyn stood beside the wagon, watching me. "You know Silas Boone?" she asked. "I know enough to wish I didn't." Her fingers tightened around the torn sleeve of her dress. "Then you understand why those men wanted me." "No," I said. "But I'm starting to understand why you were scared." She looked at the bodies, then down the road west, where the heat shimmered over the trail. "They weren't the only ones," she whispered. I followed her gaze. Far off, beyond the bend in the road, a thin line of dust was rising. Riders, too many to be travelers. I stepped to Mercy and pulled my rifle from the saddle scabbard. Evelyn's voice came quietly behind me. "Mr. Maddox?" I looked back. All the fear in her face had sharpened into something worse. Urgency. "If Silas Boone sent them," she said, "then saving me just made you his enemy again." I worked the rifle lever and watched the dust grow closer. "No, Miss Hart." I settled the stock against my shoulder. "I reckon I never stopped being his enemy." The riders came fast. You can tell a lot about men by the way they ride into danger. Honest men spread out naturally, careful not to crowd one another. Soldiers move with discipline. Drunk fools come in loud and crooked. Outlaws ride like wolves. These men rode like wolves. The dust behind them stretched long across the desert trail as they thundered toward us beneath the hard New Mexico sun. I counted at least 7, maybe 8, though the heat waves made it difficult to see clearly. Too many for comfort. Not enough to make me run. Evelyn stood beside the wagon, one hand pressed against the wood for balance. Her green eyes followed the riders growing larger on the horizon. "You think they're Boone's men?" she asked quietly. "I'd bet my horse on it." "That doesn't sound reassuring." "It ain't meant to." I checked the rounds in my Winchester rifle and glanced at the dead bandits around the road. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the dry air. "Can you shoot?" I asked. Her expression stiffened slightly, almost offended. "Yes." "Can you shoot well?" "That depends how close they stand." Despite myself, I almost smiled again. There was grit in her. Real grit. Not the kind rich folks pretended to have after spending one uncomfortable night outdoors. No. Evelyn Hart carried herself like someone who had already suffered before this road ever crossed mine. I moved quickly toward the wagon. "Help me." She didn't hesitate. Together we shoved the dead rifleman aside and dragged the wagon harder against the rocks near the bend in the trail. It wasn't perfect cover, but it narrowed the approach and forced the riders into a tighter line. A tighter line meant fewer guns firing at once. Mercy stomped nervously nearby while I positioned extra ammunition behind one of the wheels. Evelyn crouched beside me, brushing loose strands of fiery red hair from her face. "You've done this before," she said. "Too many times." Her eyes studied me carefully. "You don't look proud of it." That answer took longer than it should have. I used to be. The riders were close enough now that I could make out hats, rifles, and dust-covered coats. One of them carried a sawed-off shotgun across his lap. Another wore 2 revolvers low on his hips in the style gunfighters liked to imitate after hearing stories they didn't understand. At the center rode a broad-shouldered man with a dark beard and a scar cutting through one eyebrow. He raised a hand. The group slowed. Smart. Dead smart. They had already seen the bodies. The scarred man's eyes settled on me across the distance. Even from there, I recognized the moment he understood who I was. His horse shifted uneasily beneath him. "Well," he shouted, "I'll be damned." The others spread slightly behind him, nervous fingers hovering near their weapons. "Cole Maddox," the scarred man called out. "Boone said you were still breathing, but I figured whiskey was talking." Most men blame whiskey when they get scared. A couple of the riders shifted angrily. The scarred man grinned, though his eyes stayed cold. "Still got that mouth on you. And you still ride with cowards." Evelyn glanced at me. "You know him." "Used to." That was true enough. His name was Grant Holloway. Years ago, before Boone built his empire of killers, Holloway had ridden with smaller gangs across Arizona territory. I crossed paths with him twice. First time, he ran. Second time, he hid behind a church during a gunfight while 2 younger men died in the street for him. Men like Holloway survived because they understood something important. Dead legends stayed dead. Cowards got old. "You killed 4 of Boone's boys," Holloway shouted. "That woman's worth more trouble than you know." I'm beginning to hear that a lot today. His gaze shifted toward Evelyn. Something ugly moved behind his smile. "Miss Hart," he called. "You've caused enough bloodshed already. Boone's offering mercy if you come willingly." Evelyn's face hardened immediately. "Tell Boone to go to hell." A few of the riders laughed. Holloway did not. "That fire in you," he said calmly, "is going to get more people buried." I saw Evelyn's jaw tighten. There was history there. Dangerous history. I leaned slightly toward her without taking my eyes off the riders. "You want to tell me why Silas Boone wants you this badly?" Her silence answered before her words did. Then finally, "I stole something." I looked at her. "That usually upsets people." "It wasn't money." "Then what?" She swallowed once. "Documents." That interested me immediately. Outlaws kill for gold every day of the week. But papers? Papers mean secrets. Land claims. Railroad ownership. Political corruption. Or blackmail. What kind of documents? The kind powerful men kill to keep hidden. That narrowed nothing. Before I could ask more, Holloway's patience ended. "You got 1 minute, Maddox," he called out. "After that, Boone's orders stand." I raised the Winchester. "You should have brought more men." The riders tensed. The desert became very quiet. I heard leather creak, a horse snort, wind brushing dry grass. Then everything exploded at once. The shotgun rider fired first. The blast slammed into the wagon, spraying splinters through the air. I fired back instantly. My bullet caught him high in the throat. He dropped sideways from the saddle, crashing hard into the dirt while his horse bolted screaming across the trail. Gunfire erupted everywhere. Bullets punched into wood and stone around us. Evelyn ducked low beside the wheel, while I levered another round into the chamber. One rider tried circling left. Bad idea. I tracked him smoothly and fired. He spun from the saddle. Another shot cracked past my shoulder close enough for me to feel heat near my cheek. Holloway, still fast enough to matter. "Down," I barked. Evelyn flattened herself as bullets tore through the wagon canvas above us. I shifted position quickly. Staying still gets a man killed faster than bad aim. One outlaw rushed forward on foot, revolver in hand. Eager, young, dead. I shot him center chest before he reached the bodies lying near the road. But the others were spreading wider now. Smarter than the first group. Holloway shouted orders while 2 riders pushed toward the rocks on our flank. If they reached those rocks, they could pin us down from both sides. I hated being pinned down. "Cover me," I told Evelyn. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "With what?" I handed her the fallen rifleman's weapon. Her fingers wrapped around it naturally. Not naturally enough for years of practice, but enough. "Interesting. You ever kill a man before?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the dead outlaw near the wagon. "No. Today might become memorable." Before she could answer, I moved. Fast. I rolled out from behind the wagon as bullets slammed into the dirt where I had been crouching seconds earlier. Dust exploded around my boots while I sprinted toward a narrow ridge of stone 15 yards away. Someone shouted, "He's moving." I dropped behind the rocks just as gunfire hammered the ridge. Then Evelyn fired. The rifle cracked sharply behind me. One of the outlaws cried out. I peeked over the rocks and saw him clutching his shoulder, nearly falling from his horse. "Well," I muttered under my breath. "That answers that." Holloway realized the same thing immediately. "She can shoot," he shouted. I leaned out and fired twice. One miss. One hit. Another rider collapsed into the dust. Now panic started creeping through Boone's men. That was the thing about reputation. Bullets kill slowly compared to fear. And fear had begun whispering my name again. Holloway cursed loudly and spurred his horse forward himself. That surprised me. Maybe Boone had promised him enough money to finally buy courage. He fired rapidly while charging straight toward the wagon. Too aggressive. Too emotional. I waited. One breath. Two. Then I stood from behind the rocks. Holloway saw me instantly. His revolver swung toward my face. Too late. I fired first. My bullet shattered his shoulder and threw him sideways across the saddle. He screamed, losing control of the reins as his horse bucked violently beneath him. The remaining riders broke. One turned immediately, then another. Within seconds, the entire group was retreating west through the dust, dragging wounded men behind them. Cowards live longer, just like I remembered. Silence slowly returned to the desert once more. My ears rang from the shooting. Smoke drifted lazily through the heat. I stayed still another few seconds, scanning carefully. A man survives gunfights by respecting silence more than noise. Finally, I lowered the Winchester. Evelyn emerged slowly from behind the wagon, breathing hard. "You shot him," she said. "You sound surprised. I thought men exaggerated about you. They usually don't." She looked around at the bodies scattered across the trail. The dead. The wounded crawling away in the distance. The blood soaking into desert dirt. For the first time since I met her, her composure cracked slightly. "This is because of me." "No," I said quietly. "This is because Boone wants something badly enough to start a war." Her eyes lifted toward mine. "And now?" I glanced west where the survivors had disappeared. "Now Boone knows exactly where we are." The wind shifted softly across the road. Then Evelyn reached into her torn sleeve and pulled out a folded bundle wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Even before she opened it, I understood why men were dying. Inside were papers, official papers, railroad seals, bank signatures, land agreements, and near the bottom, names, important names, judges, sheriffs, businessmen, men with power stretching from Texas to Kansas. My stomach tightened. "This," Evelyn whispered, "is what Silas Boone is killing for." I looked up slowly. "No," I said. "This is what powerful men are paying him to kill for." I had seen men kill over gold, whiskey, cattle, poker debts, and wounded pride. But papers? Papers scared me more. Because bullets usually end with the body. Papers can bury entire towns. The afternoon sun hung low over the desert as Evelyn and I rode north along a narrow trail, cutting between dry hills and scattered cedar trees. Mercy carried both our supplies, while Evelyn rode one of the surviving horses from the bandits. Neither of us spoke much for the first hour. That happens after gunfights. A person's soul needs time to catch up with the body. Still, my thoughts kept circling back to the documents folded inside Evelyn's satchel. Railroad contracts, bank transfers, land seizures signed under false authority, names of judges and sheriffs taking payments through middlemen connected to Silas Boone. It was bigger than outlaw work. Much bigger. It was organized, careful, expensive, which meant dangerous in ways bullets alone couldn't solve. The wind carried dust across the trail while the sky slowly turned orange over the western horizon. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "You keep looking behind us, because Boone will." She pulled her coat tighter against the evening breeze. "Do you think Holloway survived?" "I know he survived." "How?" "I didn't shoot to kill." That surprised her. "You let him live." "I let him carry a message." She studied me for a moment. "You really think that way all the time, don't you?" "Thinking keeps people breathing." A faint smile touched her lips before fading again. The truth was, I hadn't always been that way. Years ago, I rode angry. Fast hands, faster temper. Back then, men challenged me in saloons just to test stories they'd heard. Sometimes I killed them because they deserved it. Sometimes because I wanted to prove I was quicker. That kind of life poisons a man slowly. He doesn't notice until one morning he wakes up unable to remember the faces of the people he buried. Only the sound they made falling. Mercy slowed slightly as the trail narrowed near a rocky pass. I raised a hand. "Stop." Evelyn immediately pulled her horse beside mine. "What is it?" I listened carefully. At first, only wind. Then, metal. Very faint. Horse tack brushing stone. I slid down quietly from Mercy and motioned for Evelyn to do the same. "Take the horses behind those rocks." Her voice lowered instantly. "More riders?" "Maybe." The pass ahead curved sharply between tall canyon walls. Perfect place for an ambush. Too perfect. I crouched near the edge of the trail and studied the dirt carefully. Fresh tracks. Several horses. Not old. Maybe 30 minutes ahead of us. I touched one of the hoof prints. Still loose around the edges. Fresh enough to matter. Evelyn approached carefully behind me. "You see something?" "Yeah." My eyes followed the canyon walls. "You ever hear of Dry Creek Pass?" She shook her head. "Years ago," I said quietly. "A gang trapped 6 marshals in a canyon almost exactly like this one. Her expression tightened. What happened? They waited until the marshals rode halfway through. I looked toward the cliffs above us. Then they opened fire from both sides. Understanding spread across her face. No survivors? Not one. The evening air suddenly felt colder. We go around, she asked. I glanced westward. That adds 2 days. And going through. I checked my revolver slowly. That depends who's waiting. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Evelyn surprised me again. We go through. I looked at her carefully. You sure? If Boone's network reaches as far as those papers suggest, we don't have time to hide from every shadow. There it was again. That strength beneath the fear. I nodded once. Stay close behind me. We remounted and entered the canyon. The stone walls rose high around us, swallowing the fading sunlight. Shadows stretched across the narrow trail, while loose gravel shifted beneath the horses' hooves. Every sound echoed. Too loud. Too sharp. My right hand rested near the colt. I hated places like that. No room to maneuver. No long sight lines. No escape once shooting started. Halfway through the pass, Mercy suddenly snorted hard, then stopped moving. That horse had carried me through storms, gunfights, and frozen mountain trails. I trusted her instincts more than most men. I slowly raised my eyes upward. Movement. High on the ridge to our left. Down. I roared. Gunfire exploded from above. Bullets shattered stone around us as I threw myself from the saddle, grabbing Evelyn and dragging her behind a large rock near the canyon wall. The horses panicked instantly. One bolted backward down the pass. The other reared wildly. Voices shouted above us. At the rocks. Don't let him out. I counted quickly. At least 5 shooters. Maybe more hidden higher up. Damn. This was no random ambush. They'd known our route. Evelyn pressed herself against the stone beside me, breathing hard. How do they find us? Boone's smarter than most sheriffs. A bullet smashed against the rock inches above her head, spraying dust across her hair. She flinched but stayed steady. Good. Panic kills faster than bullets. I peered around carefully and fired once toward the ridge. A man cried out. Then another rifle answered immediately, forcing me back down. They've got the high ground, Evelyn whispered. Yeah. That sounds bad. It usually is. Another volley slammed into the canyon walls. One round clipped my shoulder hard enough to spin me sideways. Pain burst down my arm like fire. Evelyn grabbed me immediately. You're hit. Just scraped. Blood soaked through my sleeve anyway. I ignored it. No time. The attackers were spreading along both ridges now, trying to trap us deeper inside the canyon. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. Then a familiar voice echoed above us. Cole Maddox. I froze. Not because I feared the voice, because I recognized it. Slowly, I leaned outward enough to see the ridge opposite us. A tall rider sat there beneath the darkening sky. Long black coat, white hat, gray beard, cold eyes. Silas Boone. Older than the last time I'd seen him. Meaner too. The years had hardened his face into something carved from old leather and hate. Well, Boone called down calmly, look at you. My fingers tightened around the revolver. You should have stayed buried. A few of the men above laughed nervously. Boone raised one hand and silenced them immediately. That told me everything I needed to know about him now. Power. Absolute power. His eyes shifted toward Evelyn beside me. There she is. Evelyn's face went pale. Boone smiled slightly. Miss Hart, he said, you've caused me considerable expense. Go to hell, she snapped. He chuckled softly. That spirit is exactly why your father respected you. That caught my attention instantly. Evelyn looked stunned. You knew my father? Knew him. Boone tilted his head. Your father helped build half this territory. Something painful crossed Evelyn's face. My father died 3 years ago. Boone's smile faded. No, girl. Silence settled heavily over the canyon. Then Boone spoke again. He was murdered. Even the wind seemed to stop. Evelyn stared upward in disbelief. What? Boone's gaze lowered toward me. And the men who ordered it, he said calmly, are named in the paper she stole. My stomach tightened. This just became far worse. Evelyn shook her head slowly. You're lying. I rarely lie about death. Then why are you hunting me? Boone sighed almost sadly, because those papers threaten powerful people. Powerful people pay well. And you work for them? No, Boone answered coldly. They work with me. That distinction mattered. A lot. I finally spoke. You always did dream bigger than cattle theft. Boone looked directly at me again. And you always thought fast hands could stop men like me. His expression darkened. You killed my brother, Cole. He tried killing a child. He was blood. He was filth. The canyon became very quiet after that. Boone studied me for several long seconds. Then, surprisingly, he nodded once. Still honest, he muttered. Evelyn looked between us carefully. You knew each other. Boone answered before I could. Long ago, your gunfighter here used to believe the West could still be saved. My jaw tightened. People change. Yes, Boone agreed softly. Usually into what they truly are. Then he raised a rifle slowly across his saddle. Every outlaw above us lifted weapons, too. Boone's eyes stayed locked on mine. I'll give you one chance, Cole. The last sunlight faded behind the canyon walls. Hand over the girl and the papers. His finger rested near the trigger. And maybe I let you walk away alive. The canyon fell silent after Boone's offer. Not true silence. There was still wind sliding across the rocks. Still nervous horses stomping somewhere above us. Still the faint metallic clicks of rifles being adjusted by men waiting for permission to kill. But underneath all that sat another kind of silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that comes before blood. Evelyn crouched beside me behind the stone outcrop while dust drifted through the fading evening light. Her green eyes stayed fixed on Boone above us, but I could feel the tension in her breathing. She was scared. Any sane person would have been. Silas Boone wasn't some drunken outlaw robbing stagecoaches for whiskey money. He was something worse. A man who had learned how to turn fear into business. And men like that rarely stop once they tasted power. Boone rested his rifle calmly across the saddle. Well, he called. I flexed my wounded shoulder carefully. Blood still soaked through my sleeve, though the scrape wasn't deep enough to stop me from shooting. Just deep enough to hurt. You were always terrible at negotiations, I shouted back. A few of Boone's men laughed nervously. Boone didn't. You know how this ends, Cole. Probably with you talking too much. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then Evelyn spoke beside me. You can leave. I glanced at her. What? They want me, she whispered. Not you. That's not true anymore. You don't owe me this. That almost made me smile. Oh, funny word. In my experience, most decent things people do for one another have nothing to do with owing. I checked the revolver's cylinder again. No, I said quietly. But I chose this road already. Evelyn stared at me for a long moment. Then another bullet smashed against the rock above our heads, showering us with dust. Boone's patience was ending. I won't ask again, he shouted. I leaned slightly around the stone. How many men you lose trying to trap us here? Boone's expression stayed cold. As many as it takes. That's the difference between us. No, Boone answered calmly. The difference is I learned something you never did. And what's that? That good men die tired. Then he fired. Everything erupted again. Gunfire thundered from both ridges, as Boone's men unleashed a storm of bullets into the canyon. Stone exploded around us while sharp echoes rolled through the pass like thunder. I fired twice quickly toward the left ridge. One outlaw toppled backward out of sight. Another ducked hard behind cover. Moo, I barked. Evelyn scrambled after me as I sprinted deeper between the rocks. Staying behind the same cover against elevated shooters was suicide. A rifle cracked above us. Pain exploded near my boot as a bullet tore through the dirt inches away. Damn close. Too close. We slid behind another ridge farther inside the canyon while gunfire continued hammering the stones around us. Evelyn's face was pale beneath the dust. There's too many. Yeah. You sound very calm about that. Panic waste breathing. Another volley slammed into the ridge. Then suddenly, silence. Again. That caught my attention immediately. Boone was changing tactics. I risked a quick glance upward. 3 of Boone's riders were moving down the canyon slope toward us on foot, using the rocks for cover while the others held position above. Smart. Push us from both sides. Trap us deeper. Finish it close. I hated close canyon fights. No room to outmaneuver. No room to disappear. Just stone, dust, and death. I looked at Evelyn. How steady are your hands right now? Not steady enough. Good. She frowned. Good. Men who ain't scared do stupid things. I handed her my Winchester. Her eyes widened slightly. What about you? I drew the Colt slowly. I work better up close. Truth was, the Colt felt familiar in my hand in a way I wished it didn't. Like greeting an old enemy who still understood you better than anyone else. The footsteps grew louder among the rocks ahead. One outlaw appeared briefly between two boulders. Evelyn fired instantly. The rifle blast echoed violently through the canyon. The man screamed and collapsed sideways. Nice shot, I muttered. I was aiming for his leg. Still counts. Another outlaw rushed forward from the opposite side with a revolver raised. I stepped out and shot him before he fired twice. The Colt bucked in my hand. The man folded hard into the dirt. Then Boone himself started moving. I saw him descending from the ridge with two men behind him, rifle held low as he advanced carefully through the canyon shadows. Not hiding anymore. That meant he was done waiting. The old wolf wanted to finish things, personally. Evelyn saw him too. That's Boone. Yeah. He's coming down here. Yeah. You keep saying things like that. Because they stay true. Despite the gunfire, she let out one nervous laugh. That surprised both of us. Then Boone's rifle fired. The bullet shattered the rock beside my head. Still fast. Boone shouted from the canyon. And you still shoot ugly. I moved positions again while Evelyn covered me with the Winchester. The canyon was darker now, the last sunlight dying behind the cliffs. Long shadows stretched across the rocks, turning every corner into a possible grave. I heard Boone's boots crunch against gravel somewhere ahead. Closer. Too close. Then his voice came again. You know what your problem always was, Cole? I stayed silent, listening carefully. You kept believing men could change. A figure appeared briefly through the shadows. I fired immediately. The bullet struck stone. Missed. Damn. Boone laughed softly somewhere to my right now. You spared thieves. Drunkards. Young fools. Another shot rang out. This one clipped my hat clean off my head. You thought mercy made you different from the rest of us. I spotted movement behind a boulder. Fired twice. A cry answered. One of Boone's men fell backward into the dirt. But look at you now, Boone continued. Still killing. Still hunted. Still alone. That word hit harder than the bullets. Alone. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. The West had a way of taking pieces from men until eventually there wasn't enough left in them to belong anywhere. I'd buried friends. Watched towns burn. Seen boys become killers before they learned to shave. And somewhere along the way, the stories about Cole Maddox became bigger than the man himself. That was the real curse of reputation. Eventually people stopped seeing you as human. A sudden scream snapped me back. Evelyn. I spun instantly. One of Boone's men had circled behind us through the rocks and grabbed her from the shadows, wrenching the Winchester away while dragging a knife across her throat. Drop it, he shouted at me. I froze. The outlaw grinned nervously, breathing hard. Young. Scared. Desperate. The deadliest kind. Evelyn's eyes locked onto mine. Fear lived there now. Real fear. Boone emerged slowly behind the outlaw, revolver in hand. The canyon had gone quiet once more. Only 4 men remained standing now. Boone, the outlaw holding Evelyn, and 2 others farther back among the rocks. Bodies littered the canyon floor between us. Boone looked tired, older than before, but his eyes still carried that same cold intelligence I remembered from years ago. It always ends like this, Boone said quietly. I kept the Colt lowered but ready. Not always. Yes, Boone replied. A gunfighter protects somebody long enough to care, and that becomes the weakness that kills him. The outlaw pressed the knife harder against Evelyn's neck. A thin line of blood appeared. My stomach tightened instantly. Boone noticed. There it is, he murmured. What? You finally found something you fear losing. The truth hit harder because it arrived so suddenly. He was right. Somewhere between the road, the gunfire, and the way Evelyn kept standing back up despite the terror around her, I had started caring. And caring gets people killed in places like the West. Boone slowly raised his revolver toward me. Now, he said calmly, drop the Colt. The canyon held its breath. Evelyn stared at me desperately. The outlaw holding her was shaking slightly now. Too nervous. Too much pressure. A man like that makes mistakes. I lowered my eyes briefly toward the dirt, calculating. Distance. Light. Position. Wind. One chance. Maybe less. Then Evelyn did something neither Boone nor the outlaw expected. She stomped backward hard onto the outlaw's knee. The man screamed in pain. The knife slipped, and I drew first. The second Evelyn stomped down on the outlaw's knee, everything slowed. That happens sometimes in gunfights. Men think violence is fast, and it is, but certain moments stretch strangely inside your head. A heartbeat becomes long enough for regret, fear, memory, and instinct to collide all at once. The outlaw screamed. The knife slipped away from Evelyn's throat, and my Colt cleared leather. One shot. The bullet struck the man square in the chest before Boone could even react. He stumbled backward away from Evelyn, eyes wide with shock, then collapsed hard against the canyon stones. Boone fired almost at the same instant. I twisted sideways. Pain exploded across my ribs as the bullet grazed through my coat and flesh beneath it. Ha! Sharp. Close enough to matter. I fired again. Boone ducked behind a rock as my bullet shattered stone where his head had been a fraction earlier. The remaining two outlaws opened fire immediately from farther back in the canyon. Bullets screamed through the shadows. Down! I shouted. Evelyn dropped behind cover while I threw myself behind a narrow ridge beside her. My side burned badly now, warm blood soaking beneath my shirt. She saw it instantly. You're bleeding. I've had worse. That's not comforting. It ain't meant to be. Another bullet slammed into the rocks above us. Boone's voice echoed through the canyon. You're slowing down, Cole. I wiped blood from the corner of my mouth and checked the Colt cylinder. 2 rounds left. Damn. Night was falling fast now. Shadows filled the canyon, turning the battlefield into black shapes and flashes of muzzle fire. Dangerous conditions, especially against Boone. He had always been patient in fights. Cold. Methodical. The kind of man who waited for fear to do half the killing for him. I leaned closer toward Evelyn. How many rounds left in the Winchester? She checked quickly. 4. That'll do. For what? I looked toward the darkness ahead. For ending this. Her expression tightened immediately. You can't mean walking out there. I mean exactly that. That's suicide. Maybe. You said thinking keeps people alive. Sometimes, I answered quietly. A man runs out of good options. She grabbed my arm before I could move. Cole. Her voice softened for the first time since we met. Don't do this. I looked at her hand gripping my sleeve, then at her face. Fear still lived there, but now something else existed beside it. The realization hit me slowly. She wasn't afraid only for herself anymore. That was dangerous territory for both of us. I've known men like Boone my whole life, I said quietly. If we keep running, he'll never stop. Then we find the law. I almost laughed. The law's already in those papers, Evelyn. Silence followed that, because we both knew it was true. Judges, sheriffs, railroad officials, wealthy businessmen. Boone wasn't hiding outside the system. He was protecting it. The canyon grew quieter again. Too quiet. I frowned immediately. Boone was moving. I could feel it. Predators have instincts. So do gunfighters. I slowly rose into a crouch and peered carefully through the rocks. Nothing. No movement. No voices. No muzzle flashes. That worried me more than shooting. Then suddenly, a rifle blast cracked from the darkness. One of Boone's remaining men cried out behind us. I spun instantly. Another gunshot echoed through the canyon. The second outlaw dropped somewhere among the rocks. Evelyn stared in confusion. What just happened? I already knew. Before the next voice even spoke. Boone don't pay enough for dying. An older man stepped from the shadows farther down the canyon holding a long rifle. Gray beard. Weathered face. One blind eye covered by an old leather patch. I recognized him immediately. Jonah Pike. Former bounty hunter. Former outlaw hunter. One of the few men still alive old enough to remember who I used to be before the stories got bigger than the truth. Boone cursed somewhere in the dark. You old bastard. Pike spat into the dirt. Thought I smelled rats in this canyon. Evelyn looked between us. Friend of yours? Closest thing I got. Pike lowered the rifle slightly. You look terrible, Cole. You always say that, because it keeps being true. Another shot exploded suddenly from the darkness. Boom! The bullet struck Pike high in the shoulder, spinning him hard against the rocks. I fired instantly toward the muzzle flash. Missed. The canyon plunged silent again. Pike grunted through clenched teeth, blood soaking his coat. He's moving left, he growled. I nodded. Boone was trying to separate us. Classic predator behavior. Pick apart wounded prey. I checked the Colt again. 1 bullet left. Perfect. Somehow it always came down to 1. Evelyn crouched beside Pike, pressing cloth against his wound while the old man winced. You should leave, Pike muttered to her. I'm not leaving. Then you're either brave or stupid. She's both, I said. That earned me a sharp glare from Evelyn. Then Boone's voice drifted through the darkness once more. You know what the funny thing is, Cole? I slowly stood. The pain in my ribs burned with every breath now. What's that? You could have kept writing. I scanned the canyon carefully. Nothing yet. This woman, Boone continued, these papers, this war, it never had to become your problem. His voice moved again. Closer now. But you just couldn't resist pretending to be a hero one last time. Hero. I hated that word. Heroes in the West usually ended buried under cheap wood crosses, while bad men lived long enough to grow rich. Still, I thought about Evelyn standing alone beside that wagon, about the fear in her eyes, about the way she kept fighting anyway. And maybe Boone still didn't understand something important. This stopped being about reputation hours ago. You're wrong. I called into the darkness. Oh, this ain't about being a hero. The canyon wind whispered softly around the rocks. Then Boone stepped from the shadows 20 feet away, revolver already raised. Gray eyes, steady hands, no fear, just like I remembered. No, Boone said quietly. It's about what kind of man you die as. He fired. At the same instant, I moved sideways and drew. 2 gunshots thundered together through the canyon. Then silence. Real silence this time. Boone stood perfectly still beneath the dark canyon walls. So did I. For one endless second, neither of us moved. Then Boone looked downward slowly. A dark stain spread across his chest. His revolver slipped from his hand. I was faster once, he muttered weakly. No, I answered. You were just younger. A faint smile crossed his face at that. Then Silas Boone collapsed into the dust, dead before he hit the ground. The war inside the canyon ended with him. For several moments, nobody spoke. I lowered the Colt slowly. My hand trembled now, not from fear, from exhaustion. Pike finally let out a rough breath. Damn, he muttered. Still the fastest. Don't spread it around. Then the pain in my side hit hard all at once. The canyon tilted slightly beneath my boots. Evelyn caught my arm immediately before I fell. Cole, I'm all right. You're absolutely not all right. That's probably fair. She helped lower me carefully against the rocks while Pike limped closer, still holding his bleeding shoulder. Night had fully settled over the canyon now. Stars appeared above the cliffs while cool desert wind moved softly through the pass. For the first time all day, no gunfire followed. Evelyn looked down at me, her fiery hair glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. You saved my life. I gave a tired shrug. You stomped on a man's knee. I'd say we contributed equally. To my surprise, she laughed. Not nervous this time. Real laughter. Warm and alive against the darkness around us. And hearing it somehow hurt more than the bullet wound. Because deep down, I knew something dangerous had changed inside me. For years, I had ridden alone believing that was the only way men like me survived. No attachments, no roots, no reasons to stay anywhere too long. But as Evelyn held my arm beneath the cold New Mexico stars, I realized something the West had failed to beat out of me after all these years. I was tired of surviving alone. Evelyn looked toward the satchel containing the papers. What happens now? I followed her gaze. Far beyond the canyon, powerful men still waited behind polished desks and expensive whiskey bottles. Men who would not stop simply because Boone was dead. There would be more fights ahead, more danger, more blood. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like riding away from it. I looked back at her. Now, I said quietly, we finish what this started. The desert wind moved softly through the canyon, while dawn waited somewhere beyond the horizon. And for the first time in years, the fastest gun in the West no longer felt like a ghost riding toward nowhere.